Joining us for a discussion on American headquarters, global mines, please welcome Chairman and Chief Executive Officer at Albemarle Corporation, Kent Masters, and Chief Legal Officer and Interim Chief Financial Officer at Newmont, Peter Wexler. Moderated by Executive Director of SAFE Center for Critical Minerals Strategy, Abigail Hunter.
Hi, everyone. It feels like minerals are in every headline when we wake up, and certainly the center of the Trump administration's priorities. But what does that look like in practice, particularly for companies headquartered in the United States? Being an American minerals company today means navigating global markets shaped by price volatility, concentrated processing, and uneven policy environments. And in a moment when the US government is more engaged than ever, the real question is how that focus translates into durable advantages or new complexities for those companies expected to not only churn a profit for their shareholders, but also contribute to supply chain security. I could not think of two better people to speak from this perspective here today, representing American companies headquartered here. And we talked about this backstage. Their outfits actually reflect that as well. So thank you guys for dressing the part. Kent and Peter, as operators, what do you want this audience to understand about the practical realities, both challenges and opportunities of developing and running projects in today's environments? Maybe give one or two examples based on the projects your companies are running, or kind of give us the view from where you sit at Albemarle and Newmont. I'll start with you, Kent.
Okay, good morning. So try and describe that a little bit, but it is a global business and it's resource-based. You go where the resources are. So the fact that we're an American company, that's where we're headquartered, but we work around the world. And it's key that we're able to work around the world. It's a global market, but resources really drive that. Sitting in the US, it's great to see this administration focused on critical minerals and paying attention and really driving that so we can fill some of the gaps we've had in the US. Our challenges are, look, it's what any global company would have. Our markets are growing dramatically. We try and keep up with those. It's a challenge, but it's big investment, very capital intensive, and missteps can be very expensive if you make those. So I think it's trying to manage all of those dynamics in a world that's changing what feels like every day.
Exactly. Peter.
I think Ken sent it very well. What drives it is where the resource is located. Our projects are decades long and very expensive, and that requires, and the administration's done a great job helping us. We're trying to fill those gaps as well. But it is a place where we have to go to far-flung places, and even if you're in a different country, sometimes these mines are in very inaccessible places. So it's a long process for companies like ours. And headquartered in Colorado, we do appreciate the administration's effort and focus on US companies.
And that's a great follow-up point. From day one, the president issued a directive to the Secretary of State for an America First prioritization. And we heard firsthand from the White House at the February 4th Critical Minerals Ministerial that one of their 4 initiatives is protecting American companies. But there's not many of you guys. Has it always been the case that we haven't had as many American champions in this space? And what color can you give to that history, explaining why we don't have more people working from the US on these issues internationally? Go ahead, please, Peter. Yes, yeah. Start with you this time.
The U.S. has a long, storied history in mining. It's something that over the past century has dwindled in this country. Mining is not necessarily considered I use the word sexy occupation compared to the Googles. And when I'm on planes, people say, "Oh, you're in mining, Bitcoin?" I say, no, hard rock mining. There were champions. There still are champions. There are a couple big mining players left, of which we are one of the biggest in the world. But there are very few because it's not an industry for, whether it's for optical reasons or for understanding, that people don't realize that it is the foundation of what our supply chain is based. Whether you're mining rare earths, you're mining gold, you're mining copper. This is very important at the foundational level. And companies have shrunk, companies have been absorbed, but there are really only a couple big players left in the US.
Kent, do you have anything to add on that?
Well, I think it is a big business industry, right? So there's consolidation over time that evolves, and whether it's a US or a international company that wins out in that probably has something to say about that. We came to this industry as a specialty chemical company, and the resource was so important, we felt like we had to be in the mining side. And at least we were right that the resource is so important. We're becoming more of a mining company. And so we're the rookie. We still have a hard time saying we're a mining company. We say specialty chemical with mining, but trying to manage both sides of that is one of our biggest challenges.
Yeah, and speaks to the optics that Peter was talking about too. If I may, one of the reasons we track that there's less extraction, exploitation out of the United States is some of our permitting regimes or the lack of incentives to do exploration at home. How is this administration doing in terms of supporting the changes to domestic permitting to make it more investable here? Does that contribute to kind of the state of play of us not having as many companies working to get things out of the ground in the United States or internationally? Peter, I'll turn back to you for this.
First, the administration has done a very good job of trying to fast track and streamline the process. So it's been a very good job. David Copley, in particular, has really taken the lead on that. And that's the first time I've seen somebody take a lead and really be able to push that. And it's well received by the mining community. There's a difference between exploration and mines. So fast-tracking permitting is really important. Sometimes you just want to get in, drill, see if there's a resource there, get out, minimal disturbance. But the same process that applies to exploration applies to a full mine, and less than, I would say 1%, around 1% of exploration ever turns into an actual mine. So fast-tracking that would be very beneficial. Splitting the two up for us would be excellent. But Kent said it earlier, other regimes, other countries do things a little bit differently. And also, we're resource dependent where the resource is.
Yeah, geology is stubborn. Albemarle's been at least a bit of a beneficiary from some of the permitting reforms. Kent, maybe you can kind of speak to that experience as well.
Yeah, I think, well, because a mine is such a long-term investment process, so it's not going to be short fix to get permitting right. But we're executing a mine in North Carolina. It was a brownfield. It was a mine that had been shut down. We're in the process of bringing it back. We've benefited from the Fast 41 program, and that's been a big support for us. And we're moving as fast as we can, and permits are on our critical path, but we're not really being held up by permits. We're managing to those permit dates, and you want to go at the right pace. You want to be diligent to make sure you don't make any mistakes, and I don't think permits are actually slowing us down.
So maybe I'll stick with you to kind of hear what is slowing you down. You've talked a lot in the publicly about the economics of building out processing and being able to kind of justify further investments, but the challenges at current prices for lithium. Can you speak a little bit about what needs to happen to really justify these investments, churning and getting into production, and what else you're expecting from government beyond kind of that permitting support?
Yeah, so we talk about lithium. So we hear a lot about critical minerals. I hear critical minerals, I hear lithium. So just keep that in mind. It's a lithium answer. And there are two pieces of that. There's the resource, and there's hard rock and brine, and you can process that. And then there's processing to get it into the salts or the finished material that battery makers need. The processing piece is the part that is cost challenge in the Western world, but in the United States in particular, and prices currently don't support an investment in that. The resource, it's possible to do resource projects around the world. You have to work out exactly how you process that, but you can sell that into another market. The challenge in the US and in most Western geographies is the cost of processing.
And it's a bit different for gold and copper. I'm trying to buy my fiance a wedding band right now, and it's pretty expensive to buy a gold wedding band. So you don't have necessarily the same kind of low price environment challenges, but you do have somewhat of the inverse with the negative treatment refining charges for copper. And so what's different in terms of kind of that price volatility, market volatility, and mismatch from a copper and gold perspective for Newmont, Peter?
Given the size and scale of our mines, we have to think out 30, 40, 50 years, because that's how long they're going to be there. So price volatility is something we accept. It's also a transparent market. We're not as constrained. I mean, we have to make a good arbitrage of what do we think it's going to be for a long period of time. Where I see the real potential issue for companies that want secure supply chain in copper, because we have a robust copper project pipeline. Bringing those online, we can do it. It's expensive. It will take a long period of time, but we have a robust project pipeline. I think the real thing people have to talk about is the cost of refining, the cost of smelting. There are only 2 real smelters of copper left in the United States, and it's something that administration and Congress is going to have to address, because it'll be a political solution, not a cost solution, because it will never be as cost competitive as the Asian companies that are smelting that ore.
Can I ask a follow-up? Why is that? What is the OpEx challenge for us here, or kind of the competitive advantage we're lacking that we can't compete on smelting?
On smelting, it's regulatory. I can't think of many people who want a smelter in their backyard, so it will be a political decision. It's something I think the country will need to be independent and to have its own capacity, and that's refining lots of different things, not just copper, but copper is what we know. And it is a cost challenge, and it's a regulatory challenge.
So we've somewhat got into this in terms of what the government needs to do on the specific minerals that you're both covering, but I wanted to maybe take a step back and build on kind of the government strategy, particularly from an international perspective. So starting maybe with Kent this time, what else do you think the government needs to do to most effectively support your operations globally and domestically beyond some of the things, or maybe doubling down on some of the points you've already made?
Yeah, so, well, I think permitting we talked about, so I won't go to that, but that's going to be key. And what the government wants to do, what most Western governments want to do, is build a supply chain in the West outside of China. And as we said, that's expensive. It is. China's good at manufacturing, at heavy manufacturing. They're very good. They've got a head start on this, and they have a cost base that we just don't have. So I think it's actually just going to be more expensive to do that in the U.S. than it is in China, and you can get down to some pretty clear fundamentals as to why that is. So we're going to build that capacity in the West. You need to have a market that will pay for it, because private companies or public companies like Albemarle, we can't make investments where we don't see a return, and that's the biggest challenge that we have. We had planned projects when we thought prices were going to be higher, and we put those on hold. So we can do it. We've done it in other places in the world. We feel very confident technically we can do it, but the economics just don't match up at the moment.
We'll come back to the demand side in a second, which I cannot overstate. It doesn't make sense to keep on bringing things out of the ground if no one's going to buy it, right? You're just going to oversupply an already saturated market. But sticking with the ask for government and turning back to you, Peter, with your operations in over a dozen countries, what's the biggest thing that the government can do to support Newmont in those operations? You hear about this at a high level, but in practice.
First, I have to compliment the government. They've been very helpful in certain situations and provided very good support to Newmont in trying jurisdictions. I think that the key for us is more bilateral agreements, stability, where they can add in countries we have influenced some stability so that we're not worried about, frankly, nationalization of our mines. Mines are huge things. They cost us $5 billion to bring on a new mine. When we invest, it's in the billions. So we need stability over time. We need to be able to have recourse to things like arbitration. These are very important for us because we have to see that long horizon. Kent said it very well. We're not going to invest if we can't make a return. And if that return is in jeopardy, our investors, our shareholder base, is not going to be happy. We've seen some mines that have been taken. That's a primary concern for us. Also, with stability, things like taxes. We've watched a big agreement expire in Ghana, and despite some of the U.S. and other countries' efforts to stabilize that, the taxes have gone sky high. So stability, predictability, and if the government can help us with that, that would be fantastic from our perspective.
And allowing operators like you to be able to continue to, produce in these countries comes with higher standards that you adhere to based on, being headquartered in the United States. Additionally, they can help unlock, that value addition that many producing countries are looking for, but they need to have the stability to even get the asset there, leveraging what they have in their favor, which is the geology. I want to turn back to, or kind of continue on this thought of the government asks, and And both of you have talked about, permitting, diplomatic support, the technical kind of challenges and the cost disadvantage of the midstream here that require these investments we're seeing across. This is a lot of government agencies that you're implicating. How is it going working across the diverse government blocks? How has this administration been to work with across, Treasury to USTR to the White House, State Department, Commerce Department? I can go on, but curious your thoughts on the interagency collaboration and coordination role. Kent, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, I think, well, it's a challenge in general. I think this administration is trying to do that, but they're fighting fires all the time, and there's a lot happening, right? They're trying to do a lot all at once. We think our topic is the most important, but we know it's not always on the top of the agenda. So you work across the administration. They're working together. They are trying to do big things, and we're asking them to do big things, and we think it's important. And from the work they've done so far, they believe it's important. So I think they're doing a good job managing it, but it is a lot of, the agenda is very full.
Fair enough.
It's probably not surprising that the U.S. Government bureaucracy is one of the more challenging to navigate. They are currently, as Ken said, doing a very good job of trying to streamline that. But one of the things that happens is they can streamline it, but it needs to eventually, to help companies with long histories and long futures, codified by Congress so that we can have certainty going out to all of them working together. I think it's a very bipartisan topic, critical minerals. Shouldn't be one side or the other, but you end up having these long lead things that can be codified in. That would really help if both the executive and the legislative are working hand in hand on these topics.
Yeah, and internationally particularly, kind of being able to see things like the Dominance Act, which we'll hear about tomorrow from Representatives Barra and Kim, to help, cement that support that the companies are going to get, and instead of it kind of changing administration by administration, making sure the toolbox is full and readily available when these projects have inevitable challenges in whatever jurisdiction they're operating in. Turning back to the demand side as promised, we've seen a lot of attention shift from batteries for electric vehicles towards more batteries for long-duration storage on the grid to meet data center energy demand and reindustrialization demand. There'll be panels on all of that coming, so stay where you're seated, as well as for drones, given the ongoing conflicts and the rapidly diminishing inventories of advanced weapon systems. So are these, different supply chains for LDS, long-duration storage, and for drones using the same types of battery chemistries? Is that sufficient in the demand pull that we're seeing in terms of building out your lithium business, Kent? Or what's the conversation been as we've seen that shift in focus from at least the government, but also these industries being brought in the fold on their supply chain transparency?
Yeah, so let me start by framing that. So we are kind of 2 cycles in the lithium industry since the advent of the EV. So it's a very immature business, and it was really all the volume was based on EVs for quite some time. Now with grid storage, AI data centers, grid stability, drones, all these other applications, we're getting more diversity in our demand, and this, from our standpoint, is great. It should take some of the cyclicality out of it, but it's forced growth in the business. So the EVs are still growing. They were up 20-something% lithium demand on EVs last year. Energy storage was up about 100%. Wow. And so it's growing. It's becoming a bigger part of the mix, and I think that's part of the industry maturing. It's positive from our standpoint. The technology, the battery chemistry is, for the most part, all the same. The battery chemistries on the back of EVs have gotten to what industry calls automotive scale, so that's a big cost advantage. So I don't see the battery chemistry taking a big turn dramatically. At least it will evolve over time. It's kind of the holy grail solid state batteries, so lithium metal anodes eventually, but we're still some way away. And as we get more scale, more cost effective on the traditional lithium ion batteries, it probably pushes that out a little bit.
And have the utility scale energy companies for LDS and the drone companies kind of welcomed the American-led supply chains or allied supply chains with open arms? Do they even have an understanding of where they're sourcing materials today? Are government regulations enough to draw them in?
I think it's an evolving story. a lot of the battery industry resides in Asia, particularly China. So a lot of that, particularly grid storage, is LFP technology, which China kind of owns. And it's the exact same supply chain that goes into EVs. So the companies that ramped up on electric vehicles are now selling that into these other industries. It's just increased the growth rate. But it's the same technology and the same players, and it's still dominated by China.
Good to know. And then, Peter, from your experience for Schneider Electric, you were kind of sitting on the other end of this conversation, particularly working with some of these utilities and energy producers that we're alluding to over here. You know, especially going to the upstream again, what has that been like in terms of your personal experience and being exposed to these supply chains? And how do you kind of your previous role and companies like Schneider Electric appreciate what we're talking about today? Do we need to do more education, or are they kind of on board?
I think companies like Schneider are completely on board. We were very concerned there about copper, where copper was going to go. And as a miner of copper, we're very cognizant of the fact that there's going to be a shortage of supply at some point in time. Like I said, it's going to, even if we wanted to start today on one of our projects, it would take 7 years before that came into production. So I think Schneider, one side of the coin, using the raw materials. On the other side, mining the raw materials. I think everybody's very cognizant of the potential constraints that we're going to have going forward. And it's something that we talk about on a daily basis as we decide to make investments.
And the timing of the projects coming online is kind of added with the timing of qualification of these materials to make sure that they can meet the industry specifications. Have policies, encourage manufacturers to be able to kind of source and specify these materials for these new alternatives, or is it really just about getting the supply online right now?
In my time at Schneider, I oversaw the secure supply chain aspect with the Department of the DOW now, as well as the Department of Energy. And we were very concerned about where our supply was coming from to meet all the demands of those particular groups. Here on the other side, when we're mining, we're predominantly interested in efficiency and making sure it gets into the right hands. We have a very limited amount, more or less, of where we can sell our copper concentrate for the purpose of this, or gold for refining. So from that standpoint, we become a little more agnostic to it. And then where it ends up in the supply chain after that, we have very little control over now.
Yeah, so important for the government to then pay attention to kind of those gaps, midstream gaps, in terms of the monopsony power that we see, particularly coming out of China, to buy a lot of this concentrate at very competitive prices, despite the negative treatment and refining charges we talked about earlier. We also maybe pay a little bit less attention to this topic, but I think it's an important one. Say that we may wave a magic wand, all of these government policies kind of work perfectly, and then we're going to have, these smelter commitments to be built here, more mines coming online with more streamlined and transparent permitting process, and all the social acceptability challenges are kind of gone away. Who is going to do all of this? Like, do we have a sufficiently prepared workforce for us to be able to build these things, operate them? There's all of these statistics about the great tsunami coming with mining workforce going into retirement. Any recommendations on tools we can use to get our workforce ready?
I kind of just want to let that magic wand wash over me for a second. Mine was going a couple different places. It's going to take some time. I think it's a broader manufacturing workforce, but there's a specific issue around mining and capability and growing that, but there's a broader piece around manufacturing, because if you look what we want to do in the U.S. just from industrial manufacturing, it's at a very large scale, and I don't think we have the workforce for that. I'm not sure we're getting the people from the universities that will grow into that over time, so I think it's a broader challenge than just mining. So we do a lot of investment with communities and workforces everywhere that we operate. And we've been pretty successful with that, because like Peter said, we operate in some remote locations, a lot of places. And sometimes it's the unusual place that gives you the challenge. So we're used to doing that in remote places. I think in the US, it's going to be about the whole industrialization coming back. That's a broader problem than just mining.
Yeah, it took us 20 years to deindustrialize. It's going to take us 20 years to reindustrialize. Peter, please.
100%. I mean, just focused on mining, the number of mining engineers coming out of the U.S. is demonstrably lower. It's just not of interest. We partner with several universities, and the quality of the students are fantastic. It's just the number has shrunk. You go to Canada, you go to Australia, this is still a premier industry for them, so they are turning out more people. Just anecdotally, I have several children, and one of my children, one of my sons, works for Caterpillar, and he went in there as a diesel mechanic. And he's one of very few young kids that are doing diesel and generator electronics. We don't have that workforce. Kent's 100% right. So it's a broader industrial question of attracting people to these industries, which are the foundation to build what you're suggesting.
And brings us really full circle with kind of your original comments on why we don't have as many mining champions, as the culture is kind of missing at every level. I want to close out, maybe kind of reversing course on my magic wand. What would be the magic wand policy? What would you like to see, given how long this is going to take? Say we pan 10 years later. What government policy or support mechanism has been codified and leveraged that actually gets at the roots of these challenges so that we can ultimately make a difference in these supply chain vulnerabilities?
Yeah, so if I get one, I take permitting as a given, so I don't think I have to use that for my wine. For us, it's about stability in the market, so it's a very sobering moment when you have to put before your board and your shareholders a multi-billion-dollar project that's going to take 30 years to really generate the returns that you want when you can't explain why the price moved dramatically over the last 6 months. So I think some price stability, something from the government. I don't have the answer exactly what that is. I don't think it's subsidies, but it is about having some stability so you can make investments and be able to attract the capital necessary to make those multi-billion-dollar investments.
Great. Peter.
One, I'm a little bit different than Kent, and our industry is a little bit different. So price is something we take the volatility. We don't need price floors. We don't need offtake agreements. We don't need any of that. And for the most part, we can finance our multi-billion-dollar projects ourselves. So we don't need money. But we do need stability. We need to know that there are agreements in place and the diplomatic horsepower of the United States is behind us when we're there for 40 years. That's the big thing. When you're in Papua New Guinea, when you're in Ghana, when you're in Argentina, when you're in Chile, when you're in Peru, we have these huge mines that if there's no stability, we can't predict. We can take everything, but that type of volatility.
Yeah, and when talking about price in Washington, this is always coming up. I always point to the example of aluminum smelters in Iceland when they were first built, pegged the price to power with their geothermal power for a couple of years. But in our research, we discovered, 10 years in, they decided to remove these price support mechanisms because they were a diversified enough company with enough assets that they could kind of ride with the waves to a certain degree. And so it's the difference of starting a more nascent lithium supply chain in the United States versus operating internationally for copper. So just contextualizing the different answers we're hearing, it is going to be a 60-mineral policy solution where you're going to see a lot of differences emerge. Just to emphasize the great points made by this panel, it's a lot of immovable forces that I think we're seeing here, whether it is the geology, the timing it takes to do this, the stability that's needed, or the people. And so we really need to kind of operate in those confinements and be able to fine-tune the recommendations as we navigate the very, very challenging set of issues that exist in the mineral space. But with that, I will close us out. Thank you so much for listening to us, and please join me in applauding our panel for their contributions.
Thank you.
Nice job, Ken.
Well done.